good for, you guys hear me out there? Okay, there we go. So first of all, I thought John was actually going to do most of my talk on Conways Law, but instead what he did was actually what we do at ANZ anyway. So that was pretty interesting to hear all that stuff, because I think some of us were nodding in the audience going, actually, that sounds like us. So hopefully a lot of other people felt the same way, and it's not just me. So with inversing Conways Law, there is a lot of stuff out there on Conways Law, actually, so I'm not actually going to tell you something that you probably don't know already. But what there isn't much on is actually how to apply inversing Conways Law, right? So there's a lot of what and why you would do it, but not a lot on how. So what I want to do is talk about the how a little bit and use ANZ's story for how we do it. So, and particularly at large scale. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our journey at ANZ. Some of you might know that we've been going through a huge transformation internally, and some of you might not, so you'll learn about that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the technical aspects of the culture, because that's the part of the organisation that I work in. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the lessons that I've taken through this time in the company. Wow, is this on auto move or something like that? I wonder what's going on there. Anyway, this is me. I'm a tech area lead in engineering acceleration. I've been a software engineer for about 15 years. I then decided to make the jump into management at ANZ a bit under 2 years ago. So most of that time I've spent actually between the US, the UK and Australia. I've spent a lot of time in investment banking and high frequency trading. Don't hold that against me. So a lot of algorithmic trading stuff. I then have also done a lot in, this is on some auto thing. It's all right, I'll just keep doing this. I then also spent a bit of time in San Francisco with a couple of startups, including one of my own. I've sort of still coding a little bit, not as much. I think ANZ's really testing me in a different way, but I am bringing a lot of the skills that I've had in the last 15 years to bear in this role. It's really quite a dynamic change, a dramatic change coming from being an engineer into a manager. So at the bank, what I do is actually look at how we apply automation and improve scale and speed for the organisation across the whole enterprise. So not just one particular area, but how do we make everybody in the organisation fast and support the scale of the bank. I also look after all the DevOps tooling and things like engineering advocacy. So that would be like coming out and speaking at events like this, but also internally, how we actually promote engineering internally. And I'm going to tell you why we have to do that internally a little bit as well. I also do something called accelerated delivery pipelines for both on-prem and in the cloud. That's something I'll also talk on a little bit. So does anybody not know who ANZ is, or ANZ, as John would call it? Anyone not know? Anyone? Good, because I can just burn through this then. So this is our building down in Docklands, just down the road on Collins Street. We have a building that's actually gone up to the left of this thing over here. It's actually a pretty nice little campus. This is on auto, damn it. We are hiring, but I'll come back to that, Jesus. So we are about 50,000 employees, and about 7,000 or 8,000 of those are in tech. We're the third largest bank by market capitalization in Australia, so this out of the big four. That's around 76 last time I checked, billion market cap. We have about 10 million customers worldwide in 33 markets, obviously Australia, New Zealand being the largest, and the rest being mostly in institutional banking. Like I said, we are hiring, and you can find out more in the booth outside, as we are a major sponsor. All right, so I'm going to quickly talk about our journey, and wow, this thing is really killing me, isn't it? All right, and it's so far. So is everybody kind of familiar with this? Who works in a large enterprise at the moment? All right, does this look familiar to you, right? Yeah, like you see, there's a team over here, they're going to do a build, there's a team over here, they're going to do a build, they're going to do some unit testing and stuff like that, then they're going to do some system testing for themselves, and they're going to right, I'm done. God damn it. If someone can help me fix that, that would be really appreciated. And so what you can see here is that there is a point in time where we all sort of stop working and we go into this giant sit cycle that hits, connects with mainframes and stuff like that. And then we get to the best part, which is release weekend, right? Who doesn't enjoy that? Release weekend, you know? We might do that 2 or 3 times, you know, to get a whole release out, make sure there's no downtime to customers. It's amazing. Everybody loves doing this. The other condition that we have is, you might have seen also, you know, water scrum fall, where you do, you know, 2 or 3, you know, iterations of a release, and then you go, actually now we're going to do a hardening cycle for, you know, 6 weeks or so like that, and then we're going to get a release out. You know, it's still the same. You know, we're not really mitigating any risk there. We're just, you know, making it a bit more appealing to people, for people to work on things. So this is how we do delivery today. It's really complicated. It's really difficult. You know, there's lots of barriers to getting things done. Most of you probably have architecture groups. You probably have architecture groups. You probably have security forums. You know, you probably have, you know, you got to go to get infrastructure, storage, networks, all these things, you know, capacity planning, all these things need to be done. One thing that we do notice here is that we start creating a heterogeneous type of way of delivering assets to the production systems that then go onto customers. We have different ways, different unique solutions to get things done. There is some stuff that is the driving factors behind this that John talked about, which I'll also go over a little bit. But, you know, this is like the typical experience. So delivering with speed is really hard here, right? We might actually only do 2 to 4 production releases a year in some cases. So these customers that we have up the top, they do see the value that we can provide, but it's just not fast enough, right? So this is kind of the problem. It's very, really hard to you know, deliver this value to customers. And there's other increasingly, you know, high-pressure market forces that are actually affecting us as well. You know, while this is also going, one of the other things that I find really interesting is that the market here in Australia is very interesting compared to the US and the UK markets, right? Look, we have a heavy consulting presence in all our companies. You know, a lot of companies internationally are actually consolidating and building and bring people internally and creating a shop internally. And I find in Australia we still have a lot of consulting firms, and sometimes they're even growing. So who's from a consulting firm? Yeah, I know some of those guys over there then. Yeah, so I mean, this is one of the other challenges going on with how we actually, you know, use consulting firms to help us grow and adapt our businesses, but not necessarily using them as the driving forces behind our businesses. One of the challenges that we have. Okay, back we go. Yeah, market forces. Woo! All right, so. All right, so our customers are actually becoming increasingly more digital. They're also a lot more impatient, right? Before you could just say, hey, things not ready, and they'll just be, okay, fine, you know, I'll just do something else. But, you know, they are becoming more demanding of our services, and the quality is being set by other startups and fintechs, and it's getting higher and higher to compete, you know, guys like Upbank and stuff like that. The other thing that we have over here is that there's increasing pressure from things like open banking, fintechs, neobanks, and that's presenting in a variety of ways for us. So one of the things that we have here is that APRA has lowered, APRA is the prudential regulator in Australia, if you didn't know that, but APRA has actually lowered, well, not lowered the barriers, but they've changed the barrier of entry for fintechs coming into Australia, neobanks coming into Australia. So capital requirements for them and the way they operate is now starting to introduce these you know, new conditions to the market. And what that means is that there's going to be eroded revenue for us in the future as this ecosystem starts to take shape. So one of the things we learned last week actually from our organisation is that we're going to have to become more efficient as an organisation. We're going to have to apply some of the things that John talked about earlier, and we're going to have to start turning the dial on those things. There's been a big shift in the regulation inside Australia, right? So the Royal Commission really you know, hit the banking industry hard. I'd like to say that ANZ was the best of a bad bunch, but you know, and that's true actually, I'm not just saying that, but the challenges around that, I mean, that we're going to have to work harder to, you know, win back trust from customers as well. there's increasing security challenges. So what I mean by that is that, if we're going to be competitive as a business, we're going to have to go out and start working with, third parties. We're going to have to start working with SaaS products. We're going to have to think about ways of working with these things and keeping our banks safe at the same time and our customers' data at the same time. If you lose here at the moment, it's very high stakes. If you're a bank and you get a breach, you're in a lot of trouble. So we have to be very, very careful with the way we think about these things. Technology management is probably the biggest thing that CIOs care about. They care about all of this, but that's the one. There's like $1 billion budget on people, and they have to figure out how to actually, apply that money. And there's cost savings here, but there's business flexibility opportunities here. They have to balance these things out, and that's one of the challenges that our own company is facing, and I'm sure all the others are as well. Especially when you think about moving assets to the cloud, there are all the security controls and things like that, the regulation controls that we've looked at, they all come to bear as well in how we manage our technology. And then finally, the workforce is probably the biggest challenge, I feel. The battle for talent is firmly on. There are different ways to tackle this and different ways to approach it, but high engagement with our employees is absolutely a must. And we really have to think about bringing the right working conditions for those employees, whether it's flexible working or the right tooling to make sure that people want to work at a place like ANZ. On top of all this, there are broader macroeconomic things going on, such as the weakening in the housing market, which is also affecting our business quite dramatically domestically, and also macroeconomic conditions like the trade wars in China and the US. And these are just broadly speaking true for all banks. I'm not saying this is just ANZ, this is actually everyone in Australia. So in 2016, I guess, is really where our journey started, and we had Shane Elliott appointed as CEO of the bank. He was brought up through the last 5 or 6 years inside the bank, but previously came from Citi, running institutional banking in Citi. He is one of the most, I guess, once-in-a-generation type CEOs I've seen, especially in the Australian market. He's very progressive. He has very bold ideas on what needs to happen, but he's also quite tech-savvy, even though he won't admit it, he's quite tech-savvy. In fact, he's actually going to do a little container workshop in our Pi Lab, Raspberry Pi Lab. So he's actually quite interested in tech and what's going on there. We also have Miley Carnegie, who joined in July 2016, who was the previous MD of Google Australia. She has completely changed the way that the board and our executives and our senior management look at technology and how we apply the digital transformation. And then over here we have our CIO, who's only been in the job actually for not too long, 2 years. So with this new team in place, ANZ actually then went internationally and started talking to massive organisations like ING, a whole bunch of other companies who had done or were in the process of doing digital transformations and DevOps-led transformations, and started to learn from them on what they needed to do. And when they came back, they realised ANZ needed to change. This is what we started with, essentially a matrix organisational structure. John had that great slide up on functional matrix and market-based org structures. So this is just an example. This is typical of most companies. You have a CIO, you have a manager who's controlling your networks, infrastructure, and laptops over here, and then you have like lines of business, essentially. So you might have your Australia line of business here, or your institutional line of business, and then you get funding that comes through and sets up a project that then pulls staff into that project. They get charge codes or whatever. This should sound familiar to most people. Most Australian organisations look like this. There's nothing different about that. One of the key problems with this model, though, is that IP will roll off as soon as the project is done. So when you create an asset, right, when you create a software asset, and then you roll those people off and it goes into maintenance mode or BAU mode or whatever you want to call it, that IP also goes with it, right? You get a maintenance team in, or it gets handed over to a maintenance team. So that's actually one of the biggest problems with this model. You get this proliferation of ways of doing things because people go into a particular thing and then get pulled out of it. The other thing here is that we get this cheeseburger mentality. Has anybody read Peopleware? DeMarco Lister, right? absolutely fucking amazing book. Sorry, I didn't mean to swear. 1984, I think it's written. It's still probably one of the best books in software development ever written. And it talks about the cheeseburger factory mentality, which is that you have software people and you just replace them with another software person and it all works, right? Everybody's a cheeseburger flipper. Right, so didn't think I was really going to put up our exact architecture, but but this is loosely what it looks like for everybody in these sorts of classic legacy IT organizations. So you have your customer base, you have a whole bunch of channel assets that sit in some sort of demilitarized zone or perimeter zone. You have your mainframes down the bottom. I mean, this is why I said John's talk kind of looked a little too much like our bank. And then in the middle here is just everything that we just talked about with, you create an asset, you jump out, and it plugs some problem between, a mainframe, which is batch processing, versus like a channel asset, which is real time. You have to do something that can cache up, what's going on in the mainframe one layer, and then do interactions between things, and you get the idea. One of the big challenges, again, with this is that if you have a small failure here, it can actually ripple across everything. So the fan in, fan out for assets deployed in that Here Be Dragons layer is actually, can affect organizations quite badly. On the 2nd of May, I think it is, 2017, ANZ announced in the media that we were going to completely change the way we structured our organisation and organised work. Exactly to John's point again, like I said, he's just talked about this stuff a little too much. So we allocated here's Shane Elliott here with Kath Bray, one of our senior managers, and another senior manager were responsible for helping redesign the organisation. We called this New Ways of Working, or NWOW. If I talk about it again, it's called NWOW. And after a long process, we started to shift people into a new structure. So by April 2018, we had actually moved one of our whole divisions, which is our Australia division, into a new organisational structure. And then just in December 2018, we actually moved our whole tech organisation into a brand new structure, into the same new structure, right? So what does that model look like? Well, of course it looks like the Spotify model, doesn't it? No. This is the starting point. I'm just going to start here for a sec. So here you'll see tribe and tech area. And here are squads, essentially. So yes, 2 pizza teams-ish, a whole bunch of stuff along there. You have a product owner. The product owner now doesn't have line management responsibility. They're really actually there to drive like the work and the vision behind what needs to happen. You have chapters, which are, we talked about E-shaped and T-shaped people. This is a grouping of those people to create a secondary line management around mastery to help people grow in that direction. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the challenges of this model. I don't think you just go in and straight away and do this, and I'll talk about that why a bit later. The one thing that isn't captured here is something that Spotify now has, which is called alliances. So the problem with them was that they struggled to scale. So we did also, I think, talk to them as well, and they were looking at how do you scale. We got to this point, it was great, but we're struggling with scale, guys. And so ANZ had to also think about how we did scale. And how we do that is we actually line these tribes up into another bubble on top, which we call portfolios and domains in the tech side. And this is actually how we create line management. One of the things I should mention actually is that these squads, like I said, multidisciplinary, so not everybody is the same in this squad. John had a better slide than me on this. And the other thing here is that they are autonomous in their ability to get things done, and they are mission driven. Each squad has a mission that they're trying to accomplish. So you can think about ANZ now as actually several hundred of these squads working on delivering value to customers. Now, the way we didn't completely go all in on moving everyone into a divisional line, but what we did instead was we created these overlays with the tech area and the tribes kind of being at 90 degrees here. So the tech area lead has line management responsibility for technical staff in the organisation. That's your testers, your software engineers, your whatever you want to think about in that sense. And then your tribe lead has a whole bunch of things around delivery of product and vision and stuff like that around what we need to do to service customers. And together they all they work seamlessly, relatively, I guess, at the moment, now that they've been working for a bit, towards solving these problems. Now, the tech area lead and the tribe lead actually work closely together, so it's not like one has superiority over the other. They actually work together, and they know a lot about how each other work to get things done. So one of the things I'm not going to talk about here is things like HCD, the stuff that we do about lean, and SAFe has been a bit of an inspiration in some of this stuff, but it's not completely it. If you are interested in some of these things, you can come outside and talk to us. We'll talk to you a bit more about that. So this is actually where we are at the moment. We've focused heavily on the top two things. So correctly, as John has said, the focus should be on your culture. So you can always solve tech. Tech is never the problem. It's always people, and it's always the processes that you put onto those people. You want to help solve for those first. You want to get the culture right. You want to start there. When we talked to those companies, they said, you know, ING was like, look, yeah, you can do tech. They called this thing called biz DevOps, I think they call it now. And they said when they moved to that, that was the biggest challenge. So getting your business people over the line is harder than getting a tech alignment on what you need to do. So now that we've changed, we can only fix forward, right? This new structure, we can't roll back to the old structure anymore. We have to keep going and adapting on the fly and learning and saying, okay, how do we fix this challenge? How do we fix that challenge? It's actually quite an interesting problem that we're going through at the moment. One of the big things, though, is that our hierarchy went down from somewhere between 12 to 15 levels down to 6 end-to-end, including the CEO there. So if you take the CEO out, it's only 5 levels, right? That's a massively flat organisation. I'll talk about some of the benefits of that in a sec. Last year, if you came to DevOps Talks, you would have heard Mike Berry talking about reducing handoffs. It's actually a great talk. You should go look it up. It's actually one of the inspirations for the way we work. We're still trying to get better at that, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. We've completely changed the way we've approached governance. I will talk a little bit about governance as code a bit later, but the key thing here is that we've gone, okay, teams, you are best contextualized to understand how to solve problems. The process will now be you define your process, and we will audit that process, right? There's still controls that they need, mandatory controls they still need to meet, but we're pushing it back onto the teams. So this is actually one of the best models of change. I learnt this from a guy called Jeff DeLuca, who did something called feature-driven development, if you look it up. So when we think about change, we always think about change in terms of, we've done it, we're doing something at the moment, here's the current status quo, here's the introduction of the change agent, and so we kind of should be better after that change, right? We should be up here now, and it doesn't feel like that. In the 1950s, there was a woman called Virginia Satir, who worked in early childhood development, I think, and came up with a model of change that affects not only people, but organizations. And it's simply this, that here is the current status quo. There is an injection of the change agent, and then the result of the change agent spirals everyone into chaos, right? And then at some point, the chaos abides, and there is an understanding of the situation, and then there is an incremental and iterative way of actually getting yourself into the new model of working that then creates the new status quo. Whenever you're doing a change, it's important to understand where you are in this curve. On a personal level, it's actually been quite a huge change for me. I'm actually pretty good with change, and even I was actually quite tested by what went on inside our organisation, so I can only imagine the strain that our people were under during this. During this period, though, is where we are. We're currently around this period. Some teams are actually still kind of coming here. I think for my team, we're definitely somewhere up here. So we're really at the start of our journey, if you think about it, in terms of where we're going. We've only been operating like this for 2 quarters. So of course, we're going to start feeling the pain in all this. This comes again from the Spotify literature from 2009-ish or whatever it was. It's actually brilliant. I love this slide. I love this graph. Most of the organisations in Australia are actually here, whether we believe it or not. the organizations, some great organizations are actually sort of shifting up here. I can think of, a good example of moving to a more, aligned organization that has, less autonomy is actually like a company that is saying, okay, we're going to go to AWS, and that's the only thing that we're going to be doing. We're going to AWS, right? But everybody in that organization knows the alignment. They know what they have to do. And their job now is to go from here to here. ANZ's approached it slightly differently. We've actually said what we're going to do is we're going to give you autonomy. And what we're going to do is start working from this perspective. Now you are empowered to help solve problems. Let's solve problems. And our journey is now from taking us from this culture where we're missing some alignment to creating some alignment and getting up here. Finally, he brings up Conway's Law, and there's no word definition, because John put it up before, so I'm not going to really bother. But essentially, I'm just going to read it verbatim here. Organisations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structure of those organisations. And that's Melvin Conway in 1968. So I've put this slide up instead because what we want to talk about is inversing Conway's Law. So right now, Conway's Law is saying you start here, and eventually you'll create this. Right? So small teams are likely to produce modular service-oriented architectures. Large teams are more likely to produce, this isn't strictly exactly how it goes, but I'm just simplifying it down here for you, are more likely to produce these monolithic applications. So when we're thinking about Conway's Law, we're actually talking about flipping these arrows, right? So like John again mentioned, I'm just going to use John all day long here, it's great. He did talk about, microservices being kind of like the gold standard at the moment in how we approach things. It's not strictly always the case, but majority of the case, microservices are where we kind of are heading towards as an industry. And when we're talking about how we design this, we then know that we need to create teams that kind of look like this. So whether it was by chance or some grand design, ANZ has actually managed to find itself in this position. So here we go, we have some squads, and we have some microservices that they want to build. So here's the two pizza team here, more likely to create these modular sorts of services rather than these big monolithic things that I described before. So one of the challenges about this is that we've now provided autonomy to helping solve how they create these services. So they're just going to want to find a way to create them. So what I mean by that is if we try to force our teams to create a COTS system, a commercial off-the-shelf software system, and say, right, you guys are all going to work together towards creating this thing, there's going to be handoffs, there's going to be a lot of communication paths going on between the teams to solve this. So instead, what we are biasing towards is saying, no, you can actually create the services that you need to do, and they're going to say, great, I want to create microservices. And so what will end up happening here is that a small proportion of these teams are going to be allocated onto build infrastructure and delivery automation. They're going to say, right, I'm going to create a CICD pipeline that's going to do this. And this team said, yep, we don't completely like your stack, so we're going to do something slightly differently. And I don't like your stack, we're going to do something slightly differently. So what we see by these red little people here is that they're going to go off and start working on those problems. And this kind of, now we're a big organisation, this kind of introduces inefficiency in the organisation and also slows us down. We still have all those standards and bodies that we talked about before that you still need to get through. So one of the things here is that the speed of delivery of these things is going to be related to the dependencies on all the other teams required to get something done. So these teams here are still going to have to talk to networks and to all these other groups to get something done. There is a functional relationship between their speed and how many teams they need to talk to get that particular thing done. And if those other teams are having to do this for everyone, there's constraint on that system to get those jobs done for everybody. So like this says, this is inefficient. And how can we let these several hundred squads work at speed? So here's just a random pipeline that you might create a CICD pipeline here. I'm just picking these randomly, no thing on this. So basically what we have here is a a way of deploying onto some virtualization, maybe using Ansible, and this actually is a reasonable CI/CD pipeline, right? So if you are wanting to scale this thing out, you could actually go and create some shared services that people can bind into and stitch their own CI/CD together, and that's great. We actually offer that as a baseline in the organization anyway, because not everybody can do what I'm about to talk about. And then some other people might take this model and say, hey, I want to share this with other teams and say, hey, this is a way to actually build really good pipelines, guys. Let us talk to you about how we can do that. But we want to encourage scale and speed, and we want to industrialize this for the organization. So how can we do that? Well, there's this book that came out, I think DevOps Handbook. I don't know if you guys have heard about it. And there's this section in there around chapter 8, I think it was. I had to go dig it up. And there's this section here that really spoke to me. And it's like, one way to enable market-oriented outcomes is for operations to create a set of centralized platforms and tooling services that any dev team can use to become more productive, such as getting production-like environments, deployment pipelines, automated testing tools, production telemetry, dashboards, and so forth. By doing this, we enable dev teams to spend more time building functionality for their customer as opposed to obtaining all the infrastructure required to deliver and support that feature in production. I was like, that's pretty good. I think we might actually look at doing that. So how would we do that? So Lord of the Rings here, like how do we create one to rule them all? So we have different starting points. You could start with, an IaaS-based approach on doing things, but, really where we are at the moment is that there's so much good technology in the way of PaaS out there at the moment, or the way to build a PaaS, that we're like, okay, let's try and get to here. Let's try and do this. So Kubernetes is an excellent platform to create a PaaS. It's not a PaaS in itself, but it can create you a PaaS. So one of the best things I love about what's going on here at the moment is that the CNCF has, their job now, they said at KubeCon in December, was to make Kubernetes boring. And it kind of is boring. And one of the good signals that you can find out whether a technology has become established or not is the ecosystem that pops up around that particular piece of technology, right? So we're not really talking about Kubernetes. We're actually talking about all the stuff that goes on around Kubernetes now, like Istio or operators and stuff like that. So this is a really exciting time to sort of be building a PaaS and using Kube as the centerpiece of that. And it also goes kind of hand in hand with microservices. One of the other things I love about Kubernetes is that if we're thinking about how we build a workforce, I can just focus on the developer stack, whatever they want to do, through Docker to abstract themselves away from the underlying infrastructure. And then I need a handful of people also understanding how Kube works and how SDN works and a whole bunch of other things like that. And then I just need a team that focuses on cloud infrastructure. I don't need everybody understanding end-to-end how to put something together. And this is actually very powerful in terms of going to market and sourcing people, because people understand these in the market and not how I put my internal PaaS together. So again, Mike Berry, who talked here last year, actually talked about the start of our Kubernetes journey. His team actually put together some stuff around OpenShift internally in ANZ, so on our internal Kubernetes, on our internal OpenShift. And so we've been kind of investing in Kubernetes the last several years. So what you do is you don't need these people over here anymore having to worry about how to build these CI/CD pipelines. What you do instead is you have a smaller group of people here creating a PaaS for these guys to deploy their software. And this PaaS gives them everything. It gives them their monitoring, it gives them alerting, it gives them logging, all these sorts of things. And now these engineers that were previously focused on actually developing CI/CD pipelines and all the other stuff, monitoring for that, are now just focused on delivering value to customers. So it's a very big change in the way we think about things. And what we do is we call this the paved road. And now companies like Netflix and ING and all this sort of, Shopify actually, have already sort of created these sorts of things. So we haven't created this terminology, it's been around for a long time. And what we've done is we've decided to take all these different parts of the company, like security, like governance and risk and all these things, and say, right, how can we just embed the crap out of you into this thing so our teams don't have to focus on going to these forums and all these things to get something into production. They can just write code and it just goes straight into production. You can use canaries to roll things back. We want to focus on the developer experience and also the operator experience. We want to make sure that we're thinking end to end about how we actually deliver value to our customers up there. One of the big things in how we approach this is that we think of our CICD platform, or this thing that we're creating, as a product. We really care, we listen to our engineers. We debate internally about how we actually deliver that value to our engineers. It's a very important mindset when you're thinking about internally servicing a group of people. They are actually customers. Even though I hate the term internal customer, they are actually my customers, and I care about that community deeply. So I'm going to quickly show you what the technology stack looks like. Most of our engineers, here's just an example, by the way. You don't have to do this in Google. This just happens to be Google up here. I just ripped this slide from something I did previously. So here is a way of developing a CICD pipeline. And the important thing to note here is that we use Terraform in this particular case to provision all these modules down below to be able to then be provisioned in order to spin up the pipeline. So I'm just going to go into an example of what we have. So the developer experience is actually, I write some code. There's a pull request created. I'm going to just say you rebase, you squash rebase, and then it comes back in. And then that actually triggers a decision point, which is, does this target environment exist in non-production and production? If it doesn't, start the provisioning of this infrastructure, this target infrastructure, and start the provisioning of the actual pipeline itself. So that's based off the commit. If the commit has already, after that commit, if it's already detected that there is this pipeline in place and the target infrastructure, it will just continue to use it. We then do a CI/CD kind of thing. We drop into Artifactory, which creates our image. Off the basis of that, we trigger a deployment. We use Spinnaker to then deploy into a non-prod environment. You can run your testing. You can use, packed, however you want to do your testing. We can debate that later. And then you actually push that through and go into your production environment. One of the important pieces, which John actually wrote incorrectly, it's Grapheas. Grapheas, actually, or in the Google world, it's called Container Analysis API and Binary Authorization. That's actually how we can enforce governance through cryptographically identifying who people are or who services are and making sure that they are attesting that I have actually done this activity. So you can see these attestations that are sent here from Twistlock. And they're used as the basis for preventing a deployment into the environment. Cool, does that make sense? So what are the lessons we've taken in what we've been building here? Here is our executive management. It actually starts from the top. I've heard from other talks that you can actually organically bubble a DevOps or digital transformation up from middle management or actually from the tech arm, so the CIO driving the change. I don't think that's true. I think you need buy-in from the CEO. I think they need to get it if you're going to do this successfully. Now, I could be proven wrong on that, but I think it's a very, very strong indicator of success if your CEO gets this stuff. I think that this is one thing ANZ got massively right. It started on the culture and it focused on the culture and it said, this is the thing we need to do first. And then they get guys like me and Mike Berry and a few others to sort of think about how we do the tech, but it starts with the people. One of the great things from the current Google MD in Australia, I think Anil Sabharwal, is Leadership is everywhere in this organisation. This just happens to be the top, but there are leaders throughout our organisation. We have one guy who's actually a chapter lead, I think, and he is a leader. And one of the great things this guy said, Anil Sabharwal, was that, I make you a manager, but your people make you a leader. And that can be true of wherever you are in the organisation. And that's actually how we can amplify these leaders throughout the organisation. Great senior leadership and amplification of people in the middle. Org design, I'm going to talk about this a little bit. The first major lesson is that flatten your hierarchy. One of the biggest things that we got here it wasn't too long ago, we had a whole bunch of senior people in a room. We said, these are the problems that are happening. And they said, fine, we'll just debate these. We debated them for about 15, 20 minutes, and we said, right, here's the new prioritization. We're going this way. Stop all work on this other stuff. This is what we're doing. I've never seen that before in a large organisation, ever. I've worked in lots of them. I've worked in Goldman Sachs, I've worked in Deutsche Bank, I've worked in a whole bunch of companies. Well, Deutsche is probably not the best at the moment. But we've worked in a whole bunch of companies. I've never seen this before. I've never seen a whole bunch of senior leaders get in a room and say, right, this is the direction. This is where we're going. There's only two quarters of practice, and we're going to get better at this. We're not even there yet. The shape that we have is not actually quite right. So for me, now this is just me speaking personally here, I think we have there's a bit too much proliferation of product owners. It affects conceptual integrity or the vision that you're creating around the organisation. So I think we could have done better with that, but you're learning. And I think the chapter system probably needs to be revisited, but we're thinking about stuff like that as well. Someone's calling me, that's probably the wrong time. Don't get metric obsessed. We started with going, how do we know we're doing the right thing? Is this the right thing? Is that the right thing? Let's think about metrics. Metrics is the wrong way to think about this. You need to start thinking about having some headline metrics. I think the Accelerate book does a great job of explaining what some headline metrics are. And you need to start working out how you can actually feed into that headline metric system. So we're still figuring that out as well. The one thing we didn't do with our org design is we didn't really think about value streams. I really wish we did. That was probably one of the biggest things that we could have done better. But that's okay, we can still adjust. We're in a structure now that means the next change that we make is not going to be as painful as the previous one, right? We can make smaller adjustments to the way we work because we're in this new shape. And the other thing which I don't think many people talk about is do not ignore co-location when you are redesigning your organisation. It is probably one of the biggest, most important things that you will do if you do a DevOps transformation. Co-locate your people as much as possible if you do not have the tools like Slack and stuff like that enabled to work them in a distributed manner. Do not ignore funding. Funding can actually F you up pretty badly if it's not congruent to the way that you have structured your organisation and work prioritization. You have to revisit the way you approach funding. And if you do not know finance, you should understand more about finance and CapEx and OpEx. I think it was Nathan that talked about it yesterday. It's very important to understand these concepts when doing something like this. I'm not sure if that times the one that I've actually got, but I'll keep going with it. Sorry? It is? Okay. I'm going to have to burn through these really quick. Use a PaaS if you can, like Google App Engine, if you're small enough and you don't really care about getting stuff, if you just want to get something done. Kubernetes unlocks your organizational agility. So Kubernetes in the cloud, like a managed Kubernetes in the cloud, is actually accelerant. It will just make you go so much faster. And you can do this on GKE, AKS, EKS. The investment is actually, so that picture I showed, it's not really our competitive advantage. It's actually the whole piece that sits underneath it, the shared VPC model, the networking that we have. That's actually really effing hard. We actually worked with Google to develop that. That's where your challenge is going to lie, not actually doing a completely provisionable pipeline. One thing I do want to mention about this, think about the cost of extrication out of your cloud provider, because that's actually the one that's going to hurt you the most. Minimize architectural divergence. So ANZ has over 2,000 assets. It's actually not the assets that matter, right? Like we can have 40,000 assets. It's the type of assets that matter, right? Like you do not want 2,000 types of asset. You want one type of asset as much as possible. So you have one platform for... I'm just going to try and burn through these really quickly. So use domain-driven design to think about how you're going to create your bounded context for your coarse-grained APIs. bind that to Swagger to then create a way for developers to discover. That's different to your runtime discovery, but you need your developers to discover things. I'm just going to go through some of these. Semantic versioning for service-based assets, feature toggles and release trains for customer-facing assets. Provide paved roads, you saw that. Paved roads are actually, they're actually PaaSes. If you think about it, they're actually platforms. So the workflow is baked in, meaning it's easier for your developers to get to production. So if you want to see the talk that I've done, I'm not really going to have much time to talk on governance, but you can go here to this YouTube link and you can see the talk we did at KubeCon in Seattle, I think in December, about how we apply Grapheus into this CICD pipeline. So I just want to spend one little bit of time on this if possible, because it's the most important slide to me. Australia is a unique market here. I don't know if you've seen this from South Park, but this is a thing here. So Kubernetes, like I said before, allows us to think about how we do our workforce planning. But one of the things that we don't do well is hiring, and I don't think we actually think about hiring very well because we're actually a very male-dominated industry, and there's a lot of confirmation bias in the way we approach hiring. So one of the things, I think as a cause of that is that Joel Spolsky and all these guys years ago said, hey, you need a way of hiring people in a way that they know how to code and do things. And yes, that's true, but that was before the internet, right? So the internet has changed things. What you want to focus on now is growth, on growth mindset type things. You want people who can, problem solve. You want people who can adapt. You want to be able to find people who have a willingness to learn. So there is a responsibility for everyone in this room, from everyone in competitors in other cross-sector industries. We have an obligation to get more women into tech and increase the size of the pool of the engineering workforce. There's so many more people that could be working in engineering. There is a drought of talent in software at the moment, and we can be doing a better job. And the way we can be doing that is by calling out gender biases early. My daughter's only 2, and she's, pretty, and, the little boy in the field is clever. We have to, it starts there, but it also progresses through early childhood, into high school, into university. And the thing we can do now is say people who are in university, it's about retaining them. It's not about getting people into the workforce in tech, it's about keeping women in the workforce. So changing our culture and listening to the things that we need to do to change as an industry and as individual companies to be better. So that's my pledge to you, my ask of you guys is to help us create a community where where we have more women driving the change themselves. Okay, it says only 39 minutes, so security is a blocker. Oh, did you? Oh, damn it. It's all this disruption. It's killing me. Okay, I'll just quickly call out the big thing here is the perimeter is dead. If you're currently operating a perimeter model for your organization, that DMZ I showed you earlier, that's dead. You're going to have to think about doing something different. You're going to have to use, if you're going to integrate with SaaS and a whole bunch of cloud providers and stuff like that, that's going to create further hardship for your security teams. You're going to have to rethink the way you do that. ANZ's looking at things like Zero Trust and Beyond Corp to solve these sorts of things. Outside of that, I would say you need to use your pipelines to shift left on security so your security teams can focus on hard-hitting activities like being a red team or a blue team or an orange team, whatever. Care about your employees, give them modern tooling. I'm just going to speed this up, this is my last slide. So this is just a summary of everything I've talked about before. I'm sorry this has just been a bit all over the shop, the slides and the timing's just been a bit off, but if you would like to find out more, I'm just outside. We can chat in the hallway track if you want to do that. Thank you.